All right. I want to talk about the primaries results. And I have to talk about it from two different perspectives. I have to talk about it based on based on the suppression that took place, and I'm being careful with my words here, but then I also want to talk about it in the sense of the raw numbers. All right, so let's talk about the raw numbers first so that you can get mad at me early, and then I'll talk about the suppression. The raw numbers, the percentages. Hillary Clinton got 58% last night in Arizona. Bernie Sanders got 40%. 18 point spread. I think it was almost 100,000 votes that Hillary Clinton won by. Let's take a step back, and before you change the dial, I'm just going to say it, and you just get mad at me. I don't think that there is enough suppression to overcome 18 points. Maybe it could bring a little more parity in the delegation spread. I'll give you that. But there's not enough suppression to cover 18 points. Yes, there was widespread suppression. A lot of people are crediting this suppression to Hillary Clinton, right? We're going to discuss that. There was some suppression. There was Democrats who were still marked as independents. Yes, it was problematic, yet, but 18 points. And I bring it up that way because I said this 2 weeks ago. When you're fighting the establishment, it cannot be a close race ever, because the establishment does have their games. They do have their boots on the ground. They do have people in the precincts. They do have the ability to make a close race turn out in the establishment's favor. I said that 2 weeks ago, and I said that as an appeal to Bernie supporters to say, let's get there. Let's get out there and make sure that none of these races are close. And to me, an 18-point spread, that's not only is it not close, but that's so wide of a margin that if there was, and yes, there was voter suppression, it would not close that gap. Would it bring some more parity in the delegate spread? Yes. But I'm saying this again, it cannot even be close. Look at the margins in Idaho and Utah. Bernie Sanders won by 78% in Idaho and 79% in Utah. 50-point spread, 57 points and 59-point spread. That is a blowout. That's the type of blowout you have to bring when you're fighting the establishment. Because if it's a 49, 48% kind of game, the establishment does have the capacity to stop those margins, to bring a victory out of that. I mean, and I don't care what anybody says. Listen, there are ways and methods of suppressing the vote, yes, but turning something out in your favor simply by, something as ridiculous as Bill Clinton being there and blocking people and people being, electioneering in front of a poll place, all the way to just your precinct captain, telling you something different than what the rules really are, or telling you that this is not the place for Democrats to vote. Republicans are voting here. Those little games are enough to help the establishment win on the margin. But I'm sorry, I just don't see enough suppression for 18 points. I mean, if we want to get to the actual raw numbers, hang on, I'll pull it up over here so we can talk about the actual raw numbers that Hillary Clinton won by. Let me go to my favorite source that shall not be named here, primary results, and I'm going to pull up those raw numbers. And I want you to hear me. I'm not saying that. First of all, Bernie Sanders. Hang on. Let me say this. Bernie Sanders' team better be efficient and strong enough to address voter suppression at the drop of a dime in the first time somebody calls it out. I have an expectation that Bernie's team, every election team, better have a squad of lawyers that can descend like bats out of hell to address voter suppression the day of. I mean, they need to be in the cities, around the precincts, so that if someone sneezes, they're there with a tissue. That's how voter suppression and things like this need to be addressed. So I'm putting the onus on Bernie Sanders, because a lot of people are tweeting, like they're shocked and like, Bernie, what are you doing? And Bernie, why aren't you following it up? Number one, Bernie better be following it up. I have full confidence that his team is following it up. But if they're not following up, it's either because they've checked into it and they feel like it's nothing for them to follow up on, or two, they're incompetent. And if they're incompetent, then we need to have a whole different conversation in the first place. All right. So all these questions about why isn't Bernie doing, I have the full expectation that they are doing. And if they're not doing it, I believe Bernie can put a team well enough together to determine whether or not there's legitimate fraud happening. All right. So at a certain point, we got to have confidence in the players that Bernie Sanders and anybody that we support. We have to have confidence in their players. Do you want to push them on it? Fine, push them on it. But let's go back to some logical conclusions. One, we have, if you have faith in Bernie, then you have faith in his team to put together lawyers to be on the scene like that. All right. I wanted to say that because, I don't call this, what happened yesterday is not a conspiracy theory at all. What happened yesterday was legitimate suppression, but we'll talk about the root of that suppression as soon as we finish going over these numbers, because yesterday, 400,000 total votes in Arizona, 409,000 on the Democratic side. Hillary Clinton got 23,697, about approximately, get this graphic out the way. I hate you guys. Approximately 57.6%. Bernie Sanders, and hang on, let's see. Hang on. This number looks different than what I said. Oh, no, I had the same number. It's just a rounding error. Bernie Sanders had 39.9%, 163,400 votes. I hope you guys can understand when I say that they could not successfully suppress over 100, well, what is that, about 70,000 votes. Could they suppress 10,000, 20,000, 30? At some point, now let's go back to the bigger thing now, because I think I made enough of you mad. I'm sure a lot of people are cussing me out. Let's go back to the systematic wide suppression in Arizona. Number one, it comes from the fact that Arizona in 2008 had almost 400, I believe, polling locations in 2008. And then on yesterday, they had 60. They had 200 in 2012. On yesterday, they had 60, which led to people having to stay in line for hours. I think the longest I heard was a 6-hour wait in line to vote. People were still in line at 12 a.m. What is that, Pacific? So 3 a.m. my time. People stayed in line almost a full day shift. This is an absolute example of voter suppression. It does benefit Hillary Clinton. Let me put that up before I say anything else. This benefits Hillary Clinton because Hillary Clinton, the lower the turnout, the better she performs, right? We all know that. The higher the turnout, the better Bernie Sanders performs. It's clearly benefiting Hillary Clinton. However, the source of this, well, actually, let me say that. The reason this was able to be accomplished, the reason this was done and nobody was able to stop it, the reason they cut their polling places like by 70%, the Supreme Court gutting the Voting Rights Act. A great article in The Nation by Ari Berman. I don't always like his stuff, but he's spot on with this. Maricopa County was one of those counties. Arizona is one of those 16 states that had to have any type of change in their voting process that could be disproportionately affecting people of color, minorities. They had to get that approved by the Department of Justice up until the Voting Rights Act was gutted. Section 5. Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act was exactly what was gutted, and that gave Arizona the right to do the shenanigans that they did. That is where you have the greatest potential to have almost 70,000 people disenfranchised. But there are other examples. So not everybody, most people, when they got in line, as many as they could, they did stay in line. There were other shenanigans. I'll go over all those other things. But the place where the most disenfranchisement could come from was the fact that they cut the polling places, not by half, but by 70%. since 2012. And this is the result of, this is because the Supreme Court gutted Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act. So that's just one example. The other example of voter suppression that actually is being documented, that actually happened, and something that Team Bernie better be on the ground investigating, right? If they are not investigating, then that is campaign malpractice, and shame on them. But they are investigating. Jeff Weaver said yesterday that they are looking into it. Another example of voter suppression yesterday is Democrats, people being registered as Democrats, being told that you're no longer registered as a Democrat, you're registered as an independent. You had a lot of people who changed their registration because of a closed primary. They changed their registration from independent to Democrat because they wanted to vote for Bernie Sanders in the election, in the primary. However, many people were turned away. Democrats were mistakenly registered as independents and given provisional ballots, right? This is Florida all over again, right? When you get a provisional ballot, it's almost as if you can almost forget about your vote counting. I was reading a post by Randy Rhodes. The same thing happened to her in Palm Beach County when she tried to vote, and she gave the recommendations like, if you ever get a provisional ballot, refuse to fill out that provisional ballot and go to your supervisor of elections so that you can get an actual ballot. But Arizona voters were still in the waiting in line to cast their ballots, and they were finding out as they were trying to cast their ballots that they could not vote. We have to get the raw numbers of how many people faced that situation, how many people turned from independent to Democrat, and then later on found out that their registration to become a Democrat was not either put in or was reversed, or whatever the case. There were several reports of people who were Democrats and were turned away because the system reflected them as independents. And in a closed state, that is a perfect form of suppression. So yes, there was another example of one. This is the one the media plays a role in, right? This was the one that really sounded the alarm that this is ridiculous in Arizona. Arizona was called at 8:30 local time. Arizona was called for Hillary Clinton at 8:30 p.m. local time. The polls had officially closed at 7 local time, but people were in line until midnight. Thousands of people were in line to midnight. So number one, people left because they had to wait too long. Number two, people may have left because it was already called. And this wasn't being called on the internet shows. This was being called by mainstream media, right? If anyone was listening to the radio, if anyone was listening to an online broadcast from CNN, MSNBC, this was called with less than 1% of the precincts reporting for Hillary Clinton, despite the thousands of people still in line. How many people actually got out of line and did not vote? Unfortunately, I don't think we'll ever know. Somebody could try to do a sample and extrapolate, but I'm getting this from one of my teammates. This is great news. Bernie Sanders team, so they are fighting it, right? And so many things going in my mind with this. So Bernie Sanders team, they are fighting it. Jeff Weaver said that they would fight it. I'm saying this because all day on Twitter, people were calling out Bernie Sanders for not fighting it. Bernie Sanders supporters were calling out Bernie for not fighting it. And I'm like, you guys just don't see everything that happens. All right, so it's coming across my screen now that the campaign sent out a petition demanding the restoration of the Voting Rights Act, and they had lawyers on the ground yesterday. So everyone who's tweeting angrily at Bernie Sanders, like I said, you can guarantee they have lawyers who are there with tissues when somebody sneezes and says their votes have been suppressed. So I'm sure everything that we talked about has been documented. I'm sure they're going to do what they need to do. However, I, for one, do not believe that there are 18 points, that there's over 70,000 examples. If there's one example, that's one too many, right? But it's incumbent on people who are fighting this revolution against this intransigent establishment to not allow it to be close. Because if it's close, they can play these games and get over. Hillary did not win a close margin yesterday. Hillary got 18 points on Bernie on yesterday in Arizona. If they out, let me say it like this: if they can pull out 18 points worth of voter suppression, then maybe voting at the polls is not the type of revolution we need in America. If they can pull out 18 points of voter suppression, then we're going about this all the wrong way. We're doing this wrong. We're not doing this right. All right. That's all I want to say about that. So I know people, I know you're going to be mad. Some of you are going to be mad, but I'm saying this out of respect for myself, and respect for myself says that you're not going to pull 18% on suppression. 10% is way too, 1% is way too much. The act of it, for one person to have their vote suppressed, is atrocious and disgusting. I am with you. It is an example of why the establishment needs to be brought down. I watched that interview with the what was her name from Arizona, the equivalent of the supervisor of election, and it was appalling, right? And let me say this, and actually no, I want to pull it up because it was that appalling, and it's a local broadcast, so I can't play it. However, I do want to talk about what she said. So I have it on my home Facebook page. But essentially, there was an interview discussing the number of polls that were closed, the number of polling places that was closed, and she was so nonchalant about it. Wasn't Helen Purcell, right? Yeah, Helen Purcell. She was being interviewed by Channel 11 or Channel 12 there in Arizona, and the reporter was asking her, you know, what about all of this potential suppression? And why are there only 60 polling places when this year's turnout is a record primary turnout? And this record primary turnout is bigger than what you had in 2008. In 2008, you had over 400 polling places, but now you have 60. You know what her answer was? Well, we didn't think that many people were going to vote, and we're just glad that people are interested in participating. As if that's the consolation prize, right? You know, I'm sorry you didn't get a chance to vote, but thanks for participating. If you watch this interview by Helen Purcell, you'll realize why the Democratic establishment and the Republican establishment need to be brought down. I'm sorry. Coming across my screen, 60% of all ballots were forced to be provisional. I have to get a link on that and verify that link. I have not. I heard that on Twitter earlier today, but there was no link to support that. So somebody send me a link and I will adjust accordingly. But again, 18-point spread. It can't be close. The moral of the story is, when you're fighting the establishment, we have to blow them out like Bernie did in Utah, like Bernie did in Idaho. I'm sorry. That's my story, and I'm sticking with it. All right, let's see. Phones are blowing up on this one. So let's see. 347, you're live on the air. What's your name, comment, and or question?